I found the note on my pillow the morning of what should have been the happiest day of my life. My parents had planned my wedding for months, paid the deposits, invited 200 guests. But apparently, they'd been planning something else entirely. The note was cold, calculated, and mentioned lawyers. But they had no idea what I was about to discover. Because the wedding account they controlled? It wasn't legally theirs to control. 48 hours later, their 67 missed calls would tell the whole story. My name is Jennifer Thompson, and I thought I knew my family. For 30 years, I'd been the golden child, the daughter who made straight A's, graduated summa cum laude, landed the corporate job that made them proud to brag at dinner parties. When David proposed last Christmas, my parents immediately swooped in with their grand plans. "Darling, we're going to give you the wedding of your dreams," Mom had gushed, already pulling out her tablet to show me venue photos. "The Belmont Country Club has an opening in June. Daddy's already spoken to the manager." I should have seen the red flags then. Should have questioned why they didn't ask what my dreams looked like. But I was so caught up in the excitement, so grateful for their generosity, that I missed the subtle shift happening right before my eyes. The Thompsons had always been a picture-perfect family. Dad was a successful attorney, Mom ran the local charity galas, and I was their crowning achievement, proof that their parenting style worked. Our suburban home looked like something from a magazine spread, complete with the white picket fence and manicured lawn that screamed, "American Dream Achieved." Sunday dinners were a ritual, the dining room table set with Mom's good china, Dad carving the roast while discussing my latest promotion or David's law firm partnership track. Everything appeared harmonious, loving even. But there were always those moments, fleeting glances between my parents when I expressed an opinion that didn't align with theirs, the way conversations subtly shifted when I tried to contribute to wedding planning decisions. "We've already paid the deposit, sweetheart," became their favorite phrase. "Trust us, we know what's best." The wedding planning should have been the happiest time of my life. Instead, it became a masterclass in erosion, not of my bank account, but of my autonomy. It started small, the way these things always do. Mom would mention that she'd already spoken to the florist about white roses, even though I'd shown her pictures of wildflower arrangements I loved. Dad would casually inform me that he'd confirmed the band, dismissing my suggestion for a DJ with a wave of his hand. "Jennifer, darling," Mom would say with that patronizing smile I was beginning to recognize. "You're so busy with work. Let us handle these details. We've been to more weddings than you can imagine. We know what works." When I tried to push back gently, suggesting maybe we could look at other venues or consider a smaller guest list, their expressions would shift. Not angry, never angry. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they'd look hurt, disappointed, as if I was being ungrateful for their generous gift. "We're spending $50,000 on this wedding," Dad would remind me, his lawyer voice creeping in. "I think we deserve some input on how our money is spent." Our money. That phrase started popping up more and more frequently, during conversations about the menu, the decorations, even the music. Every decision became a referendum on their financial investment, and somehow my preferences became secondary to their return on that investment. David noticed it first. "Babe, this doesn't feel like our wedding anymore," he said one evening after my parents had railroaded through another decision, this time about the photographer. "It's like we're guests at their event." I defended them, the way children of controlling parents always do. "They're just excited, and they are paying for everything." But even as I said it, something uncomfortable twisted in my stomach. When had my wedding become about managing their expectations instead of celebrating our love? The guest list became the first real battleground. I wanted 75 people, close family and friends who actually knew David and me as a couple. My parents had other ideas. "We can't possibly not invite the Hendersons," Mom declared, adding another name to the ever-growing list. "Daddy's known Robert since law school, and the Clearys absolutely must come. Patricia chaired the hospital fundraiser with me last year." "But Mom, I've met these people maybe twice in my life." "Jennifer, this wedding reflects on our family. People will notice who's invited and who isn't. You can't understand the social implications at your age." At your age. Another phrase that started punctuating our conversations. As if being 30 made me too naive to understand my own wedding. As if their social obligations mattered more than celebrating the people who actually supported David and me. The pressure was constant, but never direct. They were too sophisticated for screaming matches or ultimatums, at least in the beginning. Instead, they used disappointment like a weapon. Heavy sighs when I questioned their choices. Comments about how they'd dreamed of this day since I was born. Reminders of everything they'd sacrificed for my education, my success, my happiness. "We just want you to have the best, sweetheart," Dad would say, his hand on my shoulder in that paternal way that made me feel small and selfish for wanting things differently. "Trust us. We know what we're doing." And slowly, incrementally, I started to doubt myself. Maybe they did know better. Maybe my ideas were too unconventional, too risky. Maybe being grateful meant being compliant. The final guest list hit 200 people. The venue was a sprawling country club where I felt like a visitor rather than a bride. The flowers were white roses, elegant but cold, nothing like the vibrant wildflowers I'd envisioned. Every detail screamed their taste, their style, their vision of what a proper wedding should look like. But I told myself it didn't matter. The wedding was just one day. What mattered was marrying David, starting our life together. I could endure one day of playing along with their fairy tale if it meant avoiding conflict. 3 weeks before the wedding, everything began to unravel. I'd made one simple request. Could we add a memory table for David's grandmother who'd passed away the year before? She'd been like a mother to him, and having her photo displayed with some of her jewelry would mean everything to him. "Absolutely not," Mom said, not even looking up from her seating chart. "It's morbid, Jennifer. Weddings are about celebrating life, not dwelling on death." "But it would take up maybe 2 square feet." I said no. Dad's lawyer voice cut through the air. "We've already approved the venue layout. Changes at this point would be disruptive and, frankly, inappropriate." Something cracked inside me then. This is supposed to be my wedding. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged one of their looks, the kind that had always made me feel like I was missing some crucial piece of information. "Your wedding?" Mom's voice carried a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. "Jennifer, we've spent $50,000 on this event. We've invested months of planning. We've put our reputation on the line with every vendor and guest. And you think you can just waltz in and change things because you have some sentimental whim? It's not a whim, it's honoring someone David loved." "David will get over it," Dad interrupted. "He's marrying into our family now. He needs to understand how things work." The mask was slipping. For the first time, I saw past the loving parent's facade to something colder underneath. This wasn't about generosity or wanting the best for me. This was about control, about showing everyone, including David, who really held the power in this family. "I'm not changing my mind about this," I said quietly. "Then maybe," Mom said, her voice ice cold, "you need to reconsider whether you're mature enough for marriage at all." The threat hung in the air between us, subtle but unmistakable. Comply or lose everything. I left their house that night feeling like I was drowning. Every conversation had become a negotiation where I held no cards. Every decision required their approval. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being the bride and become a puppet in their elaborate performance. David found me crying in our apartment kitchen at midnight. What happened? When I told him about the memory table, about their reaction, about the growing feeling that we were trapped in someone else's wedding, he held me while I sobbed out months of suppressed frustration. "We could elope," he said quietly. "Just us. Vegas, courthouse, wherever you want." They'd never forgive me. Maybe that's not your problem to solve. But it felt like my problem. They were my parents. They'd raised me, supported me, loved me, hadn't they? The thought of disappointing them, of throwing away their investment, of being seen as ungrateful felt unbearable. So I did what children of controlling parents do. I tried harder to be perfect. I called Mom the next morning and apologized. I agreed the memory table was inappropriate. I promised to be more considerate of their planning efforts. I swallowed my pride and my desires and my growing resentment, telling myself it was just 3 more weeks. But something fundamental had shifted. I started noticing things I'd been blind to before. The way they spoke about David like he was an acquisition rather than my fiancé. How they discussed their wedding in front of other people, positioning themselves as the generous benefactors graciously hosting an event. The way they'd somehow made my engagement about their generosity rather than our love. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made my fatal mistake. I suggested very gently that maybe we could adjust the seating arrangement so David's college friends weren't stuck at a table in the back corner. "Those boys are lovely, but they're not exactly our caliber of guest," Mom said dismissively. "We've seated them appropriately." "What does that even mean?" "It means," Dad interjected, "that we're not putting David's fraternity brothers next to federal judges and hospital board members. There's a natural hierarchy to these things. They're our friends." "They're children playing dress-up," Mom snapped. "This is an adult event with adult expectations. If you can't understand the difference, maybe you're not ready for the responsibilities that come with marriage." There it was again. The subtle threat disguised as concern. The implication that questioning their decisions meant questioning my own maturity, my own worth. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying 30 years of similar conversations. How many times had my opinions been dismissed as naive? How many of my preferences had been quietly overruled for my own good? How many times had I been made to feel selfish for wanting things they didn't approve of? The realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't love. This was ownership. I spent the week before my wedding walking through life in a haze. Vendors called with final confirmations for details I'd never chosen. Friends asked excited questions about a day I was dreading. David watched me with growing concern as I went through the motions of bride preparation while feeling like I was preparing for my own funeral. "We can still call it off," he said the night before the rehearsal dinner. "I don't care about the money or the embarrassment or what anyone thinks. I care about you." "I can't." The words came out strangled. "I can't disappoint them. I can't waste their money. I can't—" "You can't live your life for other people, Jen. Not even parents who love you." But did they love me? Or did they love the version of me that complied with their expectations, that made them look good, that validated their choices? I was starting to suspect the daughter they claimed to adore only existed when she was convenient. The morning of my wedding, I woke up feeling like I was attending my own execution. The house was already buzzing with activity. Caterers, florists, the photographer Mom had insisted on despite my preference for someone more candid and natural. Everyone moved with purpose and excitement while I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, feeling completely disconnected from the chaos swirling around me. That's when I found the note. It was folded neatly on my pillow, written in Mom's precise handwriting on their expensive letterhead. The kind of formal communication style Dad used with clients he was about to destroy in court. "Jennifer, after much consideration, we have decided to cancel today's wedding. The level of ingratitude and disrespect you've shown throughout this process has made it clear that you are not ready for the commitment of marriage. We will be contacting our attorney regarding the recovery of expenses incurred. We expect you to handle the vendor cancellations and guest notifications. A moving truck will arrive Monday to remove your belongings from David's apartment, as we will no longer be subsidizing your living arrangements. We hope you will use this time to reflect on your behavior and develop the maturity necessary for adult relationships. Expect a call from our lawyer. Mother and Father." I read it 3 times before the words sank in. They'd canceled my wedding. Not postponed, canceled. On the morning of the ceremony, after 200 guests had traveled here, after months of planning, after I'd bent myself into a pretzel trying to accommodate their every demand, the numbness was immediate and complete. I should have been devastated, should have been sobbing or screaming or begging them to reconsider. Instead, I felt strangely calm, like a fever breaking after months of delirium. I heard David's car in the driveway and walked downstairs to meet him, the note still in my hand. The house was eerily quiet now. All the vendor activity had stopped. They must have been called off hours ago while I slept. Jen. David's face went pale when he saw my expression. What's wrong? I handed him the note and watched his face change as he read, confusion, anger, disbelief cycling through his features. They canceled our wedding because you wanted a memory table for my grandmother? Not just that, because I questioned their authority, because I wanted our friends to sit somewhere besides the back corner, because I suggested wildflowers instead of roses, because I dared to have opinions about my own wedding. David pulled me into his arms, and I let myself lean into his warmth while my mind raced. They thought they'd taught me a lesson, shown me the consequences of ingratitude, proved that questioning their judgment led to losing everything they'd provided. They had no idea what they'd actually done, because as I stood there in the wreckage of the wedding they'd destroyed, I remembered something crucial, something I'd forgotten in months of being worn down by their manipulation and control. The wedding account wasn't just to their money. The account they'd opened, the one they'd been depositing funds into for months, had my name on it too. Their names and mine. Joint account holders. I'd signed the paperwork myself, back when they'd insisted it would be easier for planning purposes. I'd contributed money too. Not as much as them, but substantial amounts from my savings. Wedding gifts from relatives had been deposited there. David's family had sent checks that went straight into that account. They might have been the primary contributors, but they weren't the only legal account holders. And they'd just made the biggest tactical error of their lives. Because the daughter they'd trained to be compliant and grateful, she didn't exist anymore. She died the moment I read their cold, calculated note. The person standing in her place was someone they'd never met before. Someone who was about to teach them that nuclear options cut both ways. I looked up at David, and for the first time in months, I smiled. I need to make a phone call. David watched me pull out my phone with a mixture of concern and curiosity. The woman who'd been spiraling for weeks suddenly had a clarity in her eyes that he hadn't seen in months. Who are you calling? First, the bank. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for our account manager. Then a lawyer. Then we're going to find out exactly what kind of legal standing they think they have. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Thompson Williams wedding account. This is Maria speaking. Hi, Maria. This is Jennifer Thompson. I need to place an immediate freeze on account ending in 7834. There was a pause. Ms. Thompson, your parents called an hour ago requesting the same thing. They mentioned some kind of dispute? My heart hammered, but my voice stayed steady. That's correct. As a joint account holder, I'm exercising my right to freeze all transactions pending legal review. The money in that account is disputed. I understand. The freeze is already in place from your parents' request, but I'll add your notification to the file. Is there anything else? Yes. I need a complete transaction history emailed to me within the hour. All deposits, all withdrawals, all sources of funds. Everything from the day the account was opened. Of course, you should have that within 30 minutes. I hung up and immediately dialed my cousin Rachel, who'd graduated from Northwestern Law the year before. She answered on the first ring. Jen, are you getting married in like 6 hours? Shouldn't you be getting your hair done or something? The wedding's canceled. My parents canceled it this morning and left me a note threatening legal action. I need a lawyer. The line went quiet. I'm sorry, what? I gave her the abbreviated version while David paced the kitchen, reading and rereading my parents' note like he was trying to decode a foreign language. Forward me that note and the bank information when you get it, Rachel said, her voice shifting into professional mode. From what you're describing, this sounds like financial manipulation at best, and possibly fraud depending on how the account was structured. I can't represent you directly because I'm family, but I know someone who specializes in financial abuse cases. Financial abuse? Jen, using money to control someone's behavior is textbook financial abuse. Threatening to withdraw support unless you comply with their demands? That's coercion. And if they've been using your joint account as leverage, that's potentially illegal. The words hit me like a revelation. I'd spent months thinking I was being ungrateful, difficult, immature. But what I'd actually been experiencing had a name, had legal precedent, had remedies. Can you have your friend call me today? Already texting her. Her name's Sarah Chen. She's brilliant, and she's going to be very interested in your case. David appeared beside me with his laptop open. I've been Googling your parents' law firm. Jen, they specialize in estate planning and corporate law. They don't do family litigation. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means their threat about lawyers is probably a bluff. If they actually planned to sue you, they'd need to hire someone else. And any attorney worth their retainer is going to tell them they don't have a case. My phone buzzed with an email from the bank. I opened the attachment and felt my breath catch. Transaction after transaction, deposit after deposit, all meticulously recorded. My parents had contributed $47,000. But looking closer, I saw other entries. $8,000 from my savings account, $3,500 in wedding gifts from relatives, $2,200 from David's family, a $1,500 deposit from my grandmother before she passed. David, look at this. I showed him the screen. They contributed $47,000, but there's almost $15,000 from other sources. $15,000 they don't own. His eyes widened. And they tried to freeze an account that contains money that isn't theirs. An account that has my name on it, containing money that partially belongs to me and definitely belongs to other people who trusted them to use it for our wedding. My phone rang. Sarah Chen had worked fast. Jennifer, this is Sarah Chen, Rachel's friend. I've reviewed the note and the bank statements she forwarded. How quickly can you get to my office? We can be there in an hour. Good. And Jennifer? Don't respond to your parents. Don't call them. Don't text them. Don't engage at all. Every interaction from this point forward goes through me. Sarah's office was in downtown Chicago, a sleek space that managed to feel both professional and welcoming. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and an energy that made me feel like I'd found the right person. Okay, let's start from the beginning, she said, settling behind her desk with a legal pad. Tell me about the account setup. I walked her through everything, how my parents had insisted on opening a joint account for easier planning, how they'd gradually positioned themselves as the primary decision-makers because they were the primary contributors, how their contributions had been used as justification for total control. And you contributed your own money to this account? $8,000 from my savings. Plus, I've been putting money in for incidentals throughout the planning process. And other people deposited money intended for your wedding? Wedding gifts from relatives. David's family sent checks. My grandmother left me money specifically for my wedding before she died. Sarah made notes. So, we have an account with multiple contributors, where 2 of the 3 account holders have unilaterally frozen access to funds that partially belong to third parties. Is that bad for them legally? It's very bad for them legally. She looked up from her notes. Jennifer, your parents aren't just controlling, they're potentially violating fiduciary duty. When you accept money from other people for a specific purpose, you have a legal obligation to use it for that purpose. Freezing the account and threatening to keep money that belongs to other people, that's conversion, potentially fraud. But they can't actually keep the money, right? Not legally. But they're counting on you not knowing that. They're betting that you'll cave to their threats rather than fight them. Sarah leaned forward. The question is, do you want to fight them? I thought about the note on my pillow, the cold dismissal, the months of erosion and manipulation, the way they destroyed my wedding, not out of love or concern, but as punishment for daring to have opinions. Yes, I want to fight them. Good. Because we're going to start by sending them a letter that's going to make them very uncomfortable. Sarah worked quickly. Within 2 hours, she'd drafted a cease and desist letter that was both legally precise and devastatingly clear. She read it aloud. Please be advised that your clients have no legal right to withhold funds contributed by third parties to the Thompson-Williams wedding account. Your threat to recover expenses regarding money that does not belong to you constitutes potential conversion and fraud. We demand immediate release of all non-parental contributions totaling $14,743, plus accrued interest. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in formal legal action including but not limited to civil suits for fraud, conversion, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. You're giving them 48 hours? I'm giving them enough time to consult with an attorney who will tell them they're screwed. Sarah smiled. Trust me, 48 hours is longer than they'll need. David and I spent that night in a hotel, not wanting to deal with the inevitable storm when my parents received Sarah's letter. We ordered room service, and I found myself actually eating for the first time in weeks. How do you feel? David asked. Terrified, relieved, angry, free. I looked at him. I'm sorry about the wedding. Jen, that wasn't our wedding. That was their production, and we were just props. He took my hand. When we do get married, and we will, it's going to be because we want to celebrate with people who actually love us, not because anyone else decides it's appropriate. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. I watched my parents' names flash on the screen over and over, call after call. By noon, I had 67 missed calls. I didn't answer any of them. At 2 p.m., Sarah called. They've retained counsel. Anderson and Associates. I know the partner. He's good, which means he's already told your parents they don't have a case. So what happens now? Now we wait for them to propose a settlement, because that's what this is going to be, a settlement negotiation, not a lawsuit. The call came at 4 p.m. Not from my parents, but from their attorney. Ms. Thompson, this is Robert Anderson representing Charles and Margaret Thompson. My clients would like to discuss a resolution to this matter. Sarah had coached me on this conversation. I'm represented by counsel. You'll need to speak with Sarah Chen at Chen and Associates. Of course. However, my clients wanted me to convey that they're prepared to release the non-parental contributions immediately in exchange for a signed agreement that you won't pursue further legal action. I looked at Sarah, who was listening on speaker. She nodded. That's acceptable in principle, but any agreement goes through my attorney. Understood. Ms. Chen should expect my call within the hour. After I hung up, Sarah was grinning. They folded in less than 24 hours. That's got to be some kind of record. What does this mean? It means they know they're wrong. Their lawyer told them they're wrong, and they want to minimize their exposure. We'll get your money back, plus money for other contributors, plus probably a little extra for the inconvenience they've caused. The settlement was finalized the next day. My parents agreed to release all non-parental contributions, plus an additional $5,000 for expenses incurred due to the cancellation. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue civil action for emotional distress or defamation. But the money was just the beginning. Word travels fast in suburban social circles, especially when it involves a canceled wedding and legal threats. By the end of the week, the story had spread through my parents' carefully cultivated network. The Hendersons, the Clearys, all the people they'd insisted must be invited. They all knew that Charles and Margaret Thompson had canceled their daughter's wedding and threatened to sue her for ingratitude. The social fallout was swift and brutal. My mother's charity board positions became uncomfortable when other members started questioning her judgment. Dad's golf partners began treating him differently. Dinner party invitations dried up as people decided they didn't want the drama. But the real reckoning came from family. My Uncle Mike called 3 days after the settlement. Jen, your grandmother's wedding money. Did they really try to keep that? They froze the account with everyone's money in it, Uncle Mike. Grandma's money, David's family's money, gifts from cousins, all of it. The silence on the other end stretched for so long I thought the call had dropped. That's not right, Jen. That's not right at all. Uncle Mike talked to my Aunt Susan, who talked to Cousin Rachel, who talked to my other cousins. Within a week, the entire extended family knew the details. My parents had positioned themselves as the wronged parties, the generous parents whose ungrateful daughter had destroyed their gift. But the truth was spreading faster than their narrative. Thanksgiving was interesting that year. David and I were invited to Uncle Mike's house, along with most of the extended family. My parents were notably absent. Apparently, they'd decided to take a trip rather than face the questions. I never liked how they controlled you, Aunt Susan said as we did dishes after dinner. Even when you were little, everything had to be their way. Your mom couldn't stand it when you had your own ideas. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because they made it clear that criticism wasn't welcome, and because we hoped you'd figure it out on your own eventually. I almost didn't. But you did. And that took courage, honey. More courage than most people have. Meanwhile, my parents were learning what life looked like without their built-in audience and emotional dumping ground. Without me to manage and control, their attention turned to each other. Apparently, when you've built your identity around being the perfect parents of the perfect daughter, losing that daughter creates a significant identity crisis. Mom started calling my cousins, trying to get them to intervene. Jennifer's being influenced by that boy, she'd tell anyone who'd listen. She's not thinking clearly. She needs her family to help her see reason. But the family wasn't buying it anymore. Too many people had witnessed years of subtle control and manipulation. Too many had watched me shrink into myself during family gatherings. Too many had seen the way my parents positioned themselves as martyrs while treating their daughter like an ungrateful child. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor who'd known our family for 20 years, ran into me at the grocery store 6 weeks after the wedding debacle. "Jennifer, dear, I heard about the wedding troubles. I wanted you to know that I think you did the right thing." I was surprised. Mrs. Patterson had always seemed fond of my parents. "I've watched your mother and father for years," she continued, "and I've seen how they treat you. Always criticizing, always controlling. A parent's job is to raise their child to be independent, not to keep them dependent forever. You're a grown woman, and it was time you stood up for yourself." "Did you tell my parents that?" Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Oh, yes, dear. Your mother came over last week looking for sympathy, and I told her exactly what I thought. I said if she'd raised you right, she'd be proud of your strength instead of angry about your independence." I hugged her right there in the cereal aisle. 2 months after the wedding that never happened, David and I got married at the courthouse with Uncle Mike and Aunt Susan as witnesses. We wore our favorite clothes, exchanged rings we'd picked out together, and celebrated with dinner at our favorite restaurant with the people who actually loved us. It cost us $200 total, and it was perfect. We used the settlement money for a down payment on a house. Our house, chosen by us, decorated according to our taste. We planted wildflowers in the front yard, the ones I'd wanted for my wedding bouquet. We created a memory corner with photos of David's grandmother and mine, surrounded by the jewelry and mementos that meant something to us. The house became a gathering place for friends who dropped by without formal invitations, who brought potluck contributions, and stayed for hours talking about books and politics and dreams. We hosted David's law school friends and my college roommates and Uncle Mike's family for barbecues that felt nothing like the formal dinner parties I'd grown up with. My parents made a few attempts at reconciliation, but always on their terms. Phone calls that began with accusations disguised as concern. "We're worried about you, Jennifer. This isn't like you. You used to be so reasonable." But I wasn't the same person anymore. The daughter who'd prioritized their approval over her own happiness was gone, replaced by someone who understood the difference between love and control. The last conversation we had was 6 months after the settlement. Mom called on my birthday, probably expecting me to be vulnerable and missing family. "I hope you're happy," she said, and the words carried an edge that suggested she hoped the opposite. "I am happy, Mom. Happier than I've been in years." "Well, I hope this independence was worth losing your family over." "I didn't lose my family. I lost my controllers. My actual family, the people who love me without conditions, they're all still here." She hung up without saying goodbye. David found me on the porch an hour later, looking at the wildflowers we'd planted. "Regrets?" he asked. "None." And I meant it. I spent 30 years trying to be the daughter they wanted instead of the person I was. I'm done performing for people who only love me when I'm convenient. He sat beside me, and we watched the sunset paint our little yard in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere across town, my parents were probably having dinner at their perfectly set table, discussing my latest transgression with the kind of detailed analysis they'd once applied to my report cards. But I wasn't there. For the first time in my life, I wasn't managing their emotions or absorbing their disappointment or trying to earn their approval. I was sitting in my own yard with my husband, planning our vegetable garden and debating whether to get a dog. I was free. The irony wasn't lost on me that their attempt to punish my independence had accomplished exactly what they'd hoped to prevent. By trying to force me back into compliance, they'd pushed me into complete autonomy. By threatening to cut me off, they'd shown me I didn't need their financial support to build a life I loved. By withdrawing their approval, they'd taught me I didn't need it to be happy. Their nuclear option had backfired spectacularly because they'd fundamentally misunderstood who I'd become. They'd been fighting a war against a person who no longer existed, the compliant daughter who would sacrifice anything to avoid disappointing them. The woman who'd taken her place had learned something they never intended to teach, that the best revenge against people who try to control you isn't fighting them or trying to prove them wrong. The best revenge is living so well without them that their opinions become irrelevant. And I was living very, very well.